The Titanic, the so-called unsinkable ship. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 unsettling Titanic discoveries that prove it was doomed from the start. Coming in at number 10 is bad luck. Now, the beginning of this journey was full of bad luck, which should have been an omen to turn back. As it was pulling out of the harbor, the ship almost collided with the SS New York. Earlier, during the construction in Belfast, fire had broken out in the coal bunkers. Those are just a few of the bad omens surrounding the ship before it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank, according to the Titanic disaster, Omens, Mysteries, and Misfortunes of the Doomed Liner, Frontline Books, by British author James Bancroft, his second book about the tragic crossing. The RMS Titanic was the world's largest and most luxurious vessel at the time, a veritable floating palace valued at $7.5 million in 1912. But according to Bancroft, a sense of gloom hung over her. Rumored aboard was the cursed Egyptian mummy's coffin lid, and there are strange events concerning the RMS Titanic than any other ship in history, and the feelings of foreboding and bad omens associated with it suggest the fate had it doomed to a watery grave, writes the author. The iceberg was just the weapon that sent it there. Number 9. Cancelled emergency drill. On April 14th, the day the Titanic struck the iceberg, an emergency lifeboat drill had ironically been scheduled. Now, due to reasons unknown, the drill was cancelled by Captain Smith. If the drill had gone through, many more lives could have been saved. The passengers would have been more likely to follow proper protocol and procedure in loading the lifeboats. You see, a little more than an hour after contact with the iceberg, a largely disorganized evacuation began with lowering the first lifeboat. The craft was designed to hold 65 people, and it left with only 28 aboard. Tragically, this was to be the norm, as during the confusion and chaos during the precious hours before Titanic plunged into the sea, nearly every lifeboat would be launched underfilled, some with only a handful of passengers. Now, in compliance with the law of the sea, women and children boarded the boats first. Only when there were no women or children nearby were men permitted to board. Yet, many of the victims were in fact women and children, the result of disorderly procedures that failed to get them to the boats in the first place. If they had done that drill, it could have saved many more lives. Number 8. Construction. The Olympic-class ships featured a double bottom and 15 watertight bulkhead compartments equipped with electric watertight doors that could be operated individually or simultaneously by a switch on the bridge. It was these watertight bulkheads that inspired Shipbuilder magazine, in a special issue devoted to the Olympic liners, to deem them practically unsinkable. But the watertight compartment design contained a flaw that was a critical factor in Titanic's sinking. While the individual bulkheads were indeed watertight, the wall separating the bulkheads extended only a few feet above the waterline, so water could pour from one compartment into another, especially if the ship began to list or pitch forward. Now, the second critical safety lapse that contributed to the loss of so many lives was the inadequate number of lifeboats carried on Titanic. A mere 16 boats plus 4 collapsibles could accommodate just 1,178 people. Now, the Titanic could carry up to 2,435 passengers, and a crew of approximately 900 brought her capacity to more than 3,000 people. As a result, even if the lifeboats were loaded to full capacity during an emergency evacuation, there were only available seats for only 1/3 of those on board. With all these issues, it's no shock that the tragedy had happened. Number 7. Violet Jessop was on board. Because Violet Jessop was on board, to me, it seems like the ship was doomed. Now, if you don't know who she is, let me introduce her to you. In 1911, she began working as a stewardess for the White Star Line's RMS Olympic. Violet was on board on September 20th, 1911, when Olympic left from Southampton and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Now, despite damage, the ship was able to make it back to port without sinking. She then continued to work on Olympic until April 1912, when she was transferred to the sister ship, the Titanic. Violet boarded the RMS Titanic as a stewardess on April 10th, 1912. 4 days later, on April 14th, it struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank about 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. She was later ordered into Lifeboat 16, and as the boat was being lowered, one of Titanic's officers gave her a baby to look after. Now, the next morning, Violet and the rest of the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia and taken to New York City on April 18th. Then, in the First World War, Violet was a stewardess on the British British Red Cross, and on the morning of November 21st, 1916, she was aboard HMHS Britannic, the younger sister ship of the Olympic and Titanic that had been converted into a hospital ship, when it sank in the Aragon Sea after an unexplained explosion. It seems like no matter what ship she was on, it sank. Number 6. They were told about the iceberg. Yep, you heard that right, folks. By 7:30 p.m., the Titanic had received 5 warnings by nearby ships. Marconi wireless operator Jack Phillips took down a detailed ship's message pinpointing the location of heavy packs of ice and a great number of bergs, but Phillips, busy sending passengers personal messages, apparently did not show it to any officer. At 10:55 p.m., another ship, the Californian, radioed to say it had come to a full stop amid dense field ice. Now, neither of those messages began with the crucial code that would have required Phillips to show it to Captain Smith, and Phillips was not in the mood for interruptions. Now, the Californian's electric signal was so close it nearly deafened Phillips. Shut up, he radioed back. I am busy. Now, a while later, the Californian's radio operator shut down for the night. As the Titanic surged onward, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee peered into the darkness. Just before 11:40, Fleet noticed something blacker than the sea lying directly ahead. As the ship drew closer, recognition dawned. He rang a warning bell 3 times and phoned the bridge. "What did you see?" came a voice through the receiver. "Iceberg right ahead," replied Fleet. Now, it's crazy that they had all these warnings and still nothing was done about it. Number 5. The Titanic wasn't the Titanic. Okay, so this is a conspiracy theory, but I feel like it has to be mentioned. One of the controversial and elaborate theories surrounding the sinking of the Titanic was made by Robin Gardner in his book Titanic, The Ship That Never Sank, 1998. Gardner draws on several events and coincidences that occurred in the months, days, and hours leading up to the sinking of the Titanic, and concludes that the ship that sank was in fact Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, disguised as Titanic as an insurance scam by its owners. The International Mercantile Marine Group, controlled by American financier J.P. Morgan, had acquired the White Star Line in 1902. Would they have really put all those people's lives at risk on purpose? I don't know, but it's definitely something worth thinking about. Number 4. No binoculars. Now, one of the most useful pieces of equipment, the binoculars, were nowhere in sight, no pun intended, when the Titanic left on its voyage. Binoculars that could have been used by lookouts on the night of the collision were locked up aboard the ship, and the key was held by David Blair, an officer who was bumped from the crew before the ship's departure from Southampton. Some historians have speculated that the fatal iceberg may have been spotted earlier if the binoculars were in use, but others say it wouldn't have made a difference. Regardless, binoculars would have been a good thing to have on board, and it seems like they sabotaged themselves by not having any. Also, my question is, why were they locked up away somewhere that you needed a key to get it out? It just doesn't make any sense. Number 3, the fire. In Titanic, the New Evidence, Irish journalist Shannon Manoli argues that the hull of the infamous ship weeks before it set sail. Through researching photos and eyewitness testimony from the time, Maloney contends that a fire spontaneously lit inside one of the Titanic's enormous coral bunkers critically weakened a crucial segment of the ship's hull. In a discovery of a trove of photographs documenting the ship's construction and preparations for its maiden voyage. Now, as he pored over the images, Maloney was shocked to see a 30-foot long black streak documented on the outside of the Titanic's hull, close to where the iceberg struck its starboard side. According to engineers from the Imperial College London, the streak in the photograph may have been caused by a fire in one of the Titanic's coal bunkers, a 3-story tall room that stored much of the coal that fueled the ship's engines. Maloney believes that the fire had started as early as 3 weeks before the Titanic set out for its maiden voyage, but was ignored for fear of bad press and the desire to keep the ship on schedule. Then the fire caused damage, which made them hitting the iceberg a fatal mistake. Number 2. Last-minute cancellations. As the Titanic was prepared to sail, some 50 booked passengers had such strong forebodings that they refused to board at the last minute, willing to lose the high cost of passage. Yep, all of a sudden they just went, nah. Now, absent was financier J.P. Morgan, whose International Mercantile Marine Shipping Trust controlled the White Star Line, and who had selected Ismay as a company officer. Morgan had planned to join his associates on the Titanic, but canceled at the last minute when some business matters delayed him, or did he know that the ship was going to sink? Now, other prominent passengers that decided not to board were former United States Secretary of State Robert Bacon, Alfred Gwen Wilderbitz, and candy tycoon Milton Snavely Hershey and his wife Catherine. Now, did they have some sort of insider information? I don't know, but it's strange. And coming in at number 1 is the wreck of the Titan. In 1898, author Morgan Robertson wrote The Wreck of the Titan. It seemed to very accurately predict what was going to happen to the Titanic. Robertson had written about a ship, the Titan, going on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic that struck an iceberg and sank. The liner did not have enough lifeboats, and it was described as being unsinkable, seeing as it was one of the biggest ships of its day. Now, doesn't that sound all too familiar? And the story was written 14 years before the sinking of the Titanic. Many wondered if Robson was a prescient writer, but others said he just knew what he was talking about since he wrote mainly about maritime affairs. Now, perhaps he saw ocean liners becoming bigger and bigger and wondered about the dangers of this, including icebergs. He was approached and asked if he was clairvoyant after the sinking of the Titanic. No, he replied, "I know what I'm writing about, that's all, but I'm not too sure about that." Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 unsettling Titanic discoveries that prove it was doomed from the start. Do you think it was always meant to sink? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.